COVID-19. The term we now use in conversation every day did not even exist a few months ago. I recently spoke with Merriam-Webster editor-at-large Peter Sokolowski about how it's among several recent additions that the locally based dictionary company made to its website.
The real question is why so few? I mean, we add normally hundreds of words at a time, 3 or 4 times a year on a kind of schedule, on a regular basis, because the language is always evolving and we're always at work all day, every day, revising the dictionary. However, in this case, there was a group of words that were very obviously very important, and the public was clearly interested because we saw in our data many people looking up, for example, COVID-19, which was a word that was coined in February of this year, and it's a word for which we did not have an entry. And so once that entry was drafted by our science staff, and was put kind of on the fast track to be in our next release, which actually still hasn't happened. And then it was decided that, we've done the work, we've done the research, we know that people are curious about these words and how important they are. And so why not just do a quick release of just these words, just 20 words. You're right, it's a dozen new words and some additional information in existing entries. So for example, coronavirus was an existing entry that already was in the dictionary, but we added some information there as well. COVID-19 was remarkable in a couple of ways. First of all, it's now the fastest word that has ever entered our dictionary from coinage to entry. Up until then, the record was held by AIDS, which was coined in 1982, and we added it to our print dictionary in 1984. So that was 2 years. In this case, it was about 34 days between the coinage of that term and our entry in the dictionary. So that sets the record. It allows also for us to show that online we can be a little bit more nimble. We can act a little bit more quickly. We're not confined to the print schedule, and we can actually contribute to the national dialogue in the way that we know people are curious about these terms, and add as much information as we can.
Looking specifically at COVID-19, it's a mashup of coronavirus disease 2019. How often is a mashup added as a dictionary item?
Well, that kind of thing happens. I mean, SARS and MERS are different kinds of coronavirus strains that were both part of the dictionary. They were already entered in the dictionary, of course. And of course, AIDS is also an initialism for the name of a disease. So it's not so unusual. But what's really going to be interesting for the sort of language watchers out there is where this settles. Some people are spelling it with all capital letters as we entered it. Some people are spelling it with just the initial C as the capital letter. Some people are using a hyphen before the 19. Some people aren't. We are going to reflect more of those variants in the update that will come up in another month or so.
You referenced when we were talking a few moments ago the research that goes into this, the vetting process of these words or phrases. And you said for AIDS, it was a 2-year time period where that was sort of used in popular language and then ended up in the print dictionary. But is the vetting process the same no matter if it's 2 years or 1 month or 34 days, like you said?
It absolutely is. The bottom line is the word used by many people in many publications? And in this case, the answer is obviously yes. There is a way to put a thumb on the scale, if you will, which is to say if an official body like the World Health Organization or the CDC acknowledges that this is the term that they will be using henceforth, then what we find is very quickly the newspapers will use that term, and it will spread itself very quickly. It will become the standard term. So we can see that the official organizations have that effect. That certainly happened with AIDS, but it can happen, if we take ourselves out of this context. Almost 50 years ago, the designated hitter was the new rule in baseball. And when the American League decided that this is what we were going to call this thing, it was clear that that was going to be a new entry in the dictionary.
To your point about the official designation coming from an organization like the World Health Organization, we saw that with social distancing. They came out using that in February. It was everywhere very quickly, but there were also critics of the phrase. One out of Northeastern University, Dan Eldridge, who has said that he prefers physical distancing. And then more recently, we've even seen the World Health Organization say, oh, they also prefer physical distancing. Do you think that we were too quick as a popular culture to embrace that idea of social distancing versus physical distancing?
Well, this is a really interesting question because sometimes the language has to catch up to the idea, and I've seen some very serious arguments in both directions about social distancing versus physical distancing. My own take on it is that I kind of like social distancing as a term for the simple reason that it brings the idea of social society, that this is a deliberate act that we are doing for the reasons of isolation for this particular disease. Physical distancing to me sounds literal. It really works in contexts that aren't connected to this disease. And so for me, social distancing seemed like a new term, a specialized term, and an appropriate term. But the fact is, with this term, we will have to wait and see. We'll have to see over the months and years to come which one is the one that settles. I can tell you that we have drafted an entry for physical distancing already that will be added soon to the dictionary, but social distancing we added in that immediate batch.
I know that data is something that you're always watching there at Merriam-Webster, who's clicking on what, when, who's looking up what, when. And you posted on your Twitter feed on March 13th some of the lookups in order. And I'll do the top 5: pandemic, coronavirus, quarantine, corona, and epidemic. For you, what do those lookups say about this particular time that we're in?
Well, that was March 13th, and the first time we saw this disease really have an effect on the American public in terms of our data was February 24th, and the word was pandemic. So clearly, people were paying attention in February to this word. And what this tells me is there's a specificity about these words, pandemic and epidemic. A lot of people want to know what's the difference between the two, and that's a really good question. These words, like so many words that are medical or legal or technical, come from classical roots, Greek or Latin roots. And so people can learn about this. The WHO decided to call this a pandemic at a certain date. There was a little bit of a debate about that, and so that's a good reason to look it up. But the fact is, epidemic, epi, and demos in Greek, epi means among or on, and demos is the same root as we have for democracy or democratic, so people, so on or among the people, whereas pandemic means all of the people. And so we can see that the etymology, the classical roots of these words actually get right to the heart of their meaning and their importance in our society. It's not surprising at all that a word like coronavirus itself, which was only known to specialists before, would be among the top words looked up. It's also interesting that among those words at that time, COVID-19 was not looked up because it was not in our dictionary yet. So now that word is in our dictionary, it's among the top words.
What about related words that you're seeing come up in searches that have piqued your interest?
Well, there are several. Some have to do with the idea of the government's response. We see martial law, for example. We see mitigate. We also see asymptomatic, which has come in much later. And it's clear to see that people are very concerned. They're following the news. They're following as much as they can the health of their families and their loved ones. Asymptomatic becoming an important term when it's become clear that some people are carriers, but who are not showing symptoms. So asymptomatic has become an important word as well. And so we see also some words that are kind of almost editorializing, a word like Kafkaesque, which means nightmarish, basically. So we're seeing this sort of commentary through the vocabulary of the pandemic.
I know that you're in the process of co-teaching a class at Amherst College right now called The Making of Dictionaries. Has this case study of these words being quickly added come up in your class?
Absolutely, because one of the things that we have talked about in every session is the way that dictionaries reflect a changing language, that there is something about the dictionary that is comforting at moments like this. The fact is there's a kind of permanence or a kind of seriousness that is associated with the dictionary. And yet the dictionary reflects a living language, and the changes in that language have to be reflected, or else the dictionary doesn't work. It has to be constantly updated. And so, yes, absolutely. We talked about how quickly, as I said, record time, how quickly these terms were added in the course. It's a wonderful chance at Amherst College to kind of have a long form conversation about dictionaries, the way they're made, and their history with Professor Elan Stavans and some wonderful and really smart students. And by the way, the local connection is so deep because Noah Webster is one of the founders of Amherst College.
Fantastic local connection. Okay, serious question here. What's the likelihood that Quarantini is going to be added? Or, my sister loves this one, and I think she may have made it up, pan-decorate. She's been decorating her house since this pandemic started.
There's a lot of these fun portmanteau words or these mashup words. I would say Quarantini has a fighting chance. We'd have to wait. We have to give it some time. It's not a term that was endorsed by the World Health Organization after all. However, it is a term that I have seen in lots of journalism. There's so much writing going on because we're following this, many of us from home, many of us online, and there's a lot of content, whether it be the New York Times or local papers, and these are terms that are showing up. So the fact is, there were things like victory gardens in World War II, and we still remember that term. So it's absolutely possible that we could see that in the dictionary.